Okay, in today's lesson, we are going to consider the pattern of development across the world, and we're also going to consider the specific pattern of wealth across Africa, which is going to allow us to identify regions of the world which are doing well and not so well. We're going to focus on two key areas or two ways of measuring development, both the idea that the wealth of a nation is an important factor in how well a country is doing, as well as how long the citizens of that country get to live in what we call its life expectancy. Now, the two objectives are outlined here, so you might want to pause the video and have a quick read through what those objectives are. You should also have this class task open in front of you, which is a task 1C. Let's just start by actually thinking about the global pattern of development. Okay, so I've just scrolled down to a map, a purple-blue colored map that shows the pattern of wealth across the world. And we've really explored this idea of GDP in the last lesson, which we know, hopefully, remember, it means the gross domestic product. And it basically means how much, on average, does a person create in a year in terms of wealth. Best way of thinking about this is the amount of income your parents earn in a year. And we can see that the countries that are light blue, which is under $2,000 a year, and dollars are used as the international measure of money, it allows us to compare countries with each other, are found in Central and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as a few regions of Southern Asia. We can, in contrast, find that countries over 50,000, shown by the dark purple, are found in areas of North America and Europe, as well as Southeast Asia over here, and Australia and New Zealand. So we have a very distinct pattern, but we can see that within each continent, there is huge variation, including Africa itself. We have countries as low as under 2,000 US dollars a year in the central region, but in the north and the south, we can see that these countries have over 10, somewhere between 10 and 20,000. And indeed, if we look at South America, we can see that there's a country round about between 2 and 5,000. That's this country here, Bolivia. In contrast, we have this little country in the northern part of South America, which is over 35,000. So there is massive variation as we move around the world, and there must be reasons for that. Now, we're not yet at the stage where we're thinking about what's causing these huge inequalities. We're still just thinking about why are these things happening. You can see here that I've written a very detailed description that describes that map. And this is a key skill in geography, being able to look at a map, use a key that you're given with it, to then describe. And the first thing is, what does the map show? Well, it's wealth across the world as measured by this thing called GDP. What's the key tell us? Well, the key ranges from countries under 2,000, marked in light blue, to countries over 50,000, marked in dark purple. And then all we need to do is, rather than just go around naming individual countries, we want to pick up on patterns. So, for example, we can see that the majority of the western part of Europe, this area that I'm circling here, have countries over 35,000. Okay? Let's have a look at life expectancy. What's the global pattern for how long we live? Now, there's a different color pattern used here. In this case, oranges have been used for the lower colors, and greens have been used for the higher. And for example, countries where people live over 82 are marked as a very dark green, and countries under 55 are marked as a dark purple. Now, just as we saw with wealth, and there does seem to be a link which we'll explore later in today's lesson, we've got a definite central sub-Saharan African pattern to the very lowest lived countries with the lowest life expectancies, whether that is under 55 or 55 to 59 or 60 to 62. These are countries where people on average are living short lives, and they're almost all entirely found in this central region of Africa. Okay. Once again, if we look at Africa, though, we do see that there is some contrast here, that the northern regions actually have countries where people are living as long as over 75. So there is, once again, very big variation in Africa. We now have another paragraph, which I'd suggest just pause the video and read through. Okay. What this paragraph does is it does once again show us that there is big variation. And we can see that once again, Western Europe is this area where people are living on average to be at least around about 80 or more years of age. Same with North America. Asia is a very mixed pattern of countries that are quite low. So we have this country here, Afghanistan, which is down at between 62.5 and 64.9 years of age. And that contrasts quite sharply with South Korea over here and Japan, where they're living to be over 82. Okay, so that's the global pattern explored. And we do seem to have a link between areas that are wealthy and areas that are living a long time, as well as areas that are poor and areas that are not living a long time. We'll come back to that later, as I said earlier. Right, so what are you being asked to do? In a second, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and complete task 1A. So what are you going to be doing? Well, you're going to be creating your own map using a piece of software. And you're going to be mapping some data, which is then going to give you a pattern. But rather than doing the whole world, you're just going to focus in on Africa. Because as I've suggested, Africa itself seems to be quite complicated and have quite a considerable amount of variation. And if I go back to the lesson objective, one of the key things here I've said we should be careful when lumping all African countries into the same category. In this case, we should not be calling all African countries less developed, because clearly this is not the case. Now I'm just going to change that from probably to less developed. So not all of Africa is that. And we've seen that from the global pattern. So let's go ahead and create our map. So the first thing I'd like to do is go back into the main classroom task and find a spreadsheet called Describing Development Mapping Data. And it should look something like this. Okay. Now, once you've opened up your spreadsheet, you'll see there are 4 columns of data. We've got all of Africa's countries in alphabetical order. And we've got the GDP, the wealth of people on average in each of these African countries. So we can see Algeria, they've got 12,000 on average. We can, next to that, see also how they're doing with their life expectancy. So Algerians live to be 77 years of age on average. Now, first task I'd like to do is, once I've shown you how to do this, pause the video, complete this step, and then follow each step as I go through it, pausing the video and completing it, and then going back to the video. So highlight all of the first 2 columns. So that includes the title, country, and the title GDP per capita, as well as all of the African countries' names and all of the GDP like I've done there. Okay, once you've highlighted it, you want to hit this little insert chart button, and it's going to automatically create a graph for you. Now, in this case, we're going to want to change this. We do not want a histogram. We're going to create a map. So what I would do is go over here. You should have the chart editor open, and the setup menu should be highlighted. And you want to change from the histogram option to scroll down to this little button here, which shows map, and you want to select this button. Okay, so go ahead and do that. Okay, now I'm assuming you've got this map created. I'm just going to move it across so I can still see my data. I'm now only going to want to show Africa. I'm not interested in the rest of the world. So the next thing to do is click on the Customize button, move from the Setup menu to the Customize menu, and next step is click on the Geo button. Okay, so go ahead and do that. Right, I'm assuming you've got the Geo button open now of the Customize menu. You now want to select Africa only. And that's going to remove the rest of the world, and we only get to see Africa. So go ahead and do that. Right, and we're now going to assume we've got Africa. Now, one of the really important things in map making, which is something you're doing, you are becoming a cartographer today, which is the specialized name for map makers. These sorts of maps are best when they show the same color, but in different shading. And what I'm going to ask you to do is select the minimum category as a very light shaded version. Now, it can be any of the categories. I could go, for example, with a light blue. You want the middle range countries to be a slightly darker blue, and you want the maximum range countries to be a very dark shade of blue. Okay? You could do this for red, for example. Change the mid to a mid shade red, and change the maximum to a very dark shade red. What it allows you to do when you look back at the map is very quickly identify all of the countries that are scoring lowly or have low GDPs, like Central African Republic or South Sudan, as well as very quickly spot the countries that are really high, like the ones I'm highlighting. Okay? Now that you've created your map using whatever color you've got, you can just play around with it a little bit. You can click on the chart style menu and you can create a background color if you want. If you want your sea to have a color, you can do it that. You can also give your chart a border if you're interested in giving it a border as well. And finally, the key itself, which tells us what these colors all mean, we can change the font if we wanted to on that. Final bit is you want to bring this map into your document. So let's click on the map. You want to copy it. So edit, copy, or you can use the Control-C button on your keyboard and go back to your task thing. And what I'd like you to do is paste that map like that. And there's our map. Now, we don't have a name for the map, so we're going to want to give this map a name, and we're going to want to call this the GDP of Africa. Okay, so we can type here GDP of Africa as our title, and that gives our map a title. Right, that's our first map created. Our second map, make sure you've done all of the steps that I've shown you, because we're now going to map our second map using this data, and we're going to use a different type of map for this. So in this case, I want you to once again select all the data like we did last time, all the way down to Zimbabwe. And we're going to once again use the little insert chart selector. Once again, it's going to come up with a histogram and we're going to change it. But this time, we're not going to select this map, which is known as a choropleth map or a shading density map. Instead, we're going to select this map, which is known as a proportional symbols map. So pause it at this stage and create that map. Okay, I'm assuming you've got this far. We're now going to do a similar step that we did with our previous map. We just want Africa. So we're going to customize it. We're going to go to the Geo button and we're going to select just Africa. Now I'm going to keep the colors as they're presetting here. I could select the mid-range to a different color if I want. What I'm wanting though is to very easily see the big circles, which represent the countries where people live a long time, and the small circles where people live a very short period of time compared to the longer lived countries. You can, if you want, if you're really interested in the presentation of your map, you can change the sea color to whatever you want, and you can change the text of your key. You're going to want to bring this map in, however. So make sure this map's selected, edit, copy, 1C development, and then under your first map, just going to click enter there a few times. You're going to want to paste this second map. So Control V is my shortcut, or you can just do edit, paste. Right, I can shrink these two maps down. You don't need to keep them the whole page. So there we have our two maps of Africa. What we now have got, and you want to pause the video here and make sure you finish these two tasks, is you're going to want to try to answer question 1B. Suggest possible reasons that help us understand why wealthier nations are likely to live longer. Now, there are many reasons that we're going to start exploring, but what I'd like you to think is, how would the wealth of a nation, its GDP, influence the length that people live to? Now, there's two things you want to think about. The first one is, why do people with more money, like individual families, potentially live longer than people with less money? But the other thing I want to think about is, why do wealthier governments, where governments have more money because they've got more tax from their people, how do those governments and those leaders influence how long the people of those countries live? What can governments put in place? What can they build? What can they put in place in cities? Think about some of the themes that we've learned about. Go back to the first lesson where you thought about that little girl in Malawi. What are the things that a government could put in place that would ensure she would live longer? And of course, pretty much anything that governments put in place requires money. So the bigger the GDP you've got, the more wealth you've got, the more likely that people are going to live longer. So give me a nice long explained paragraph. And if you are finished tasks 1A and B before the lesson is out, you can try the 2 extension tasks.